The most important thing we as healthcare providers have to be able to do is help mothers and their families to make an informed decision about the provision of human milk. Around the world, formula company marketing it's a global issue, and all mothers and families are exposed to that. And mothers and families really don't understand the science of human milk. And I think we have to change our approach from being breastfeeding is best to helping families understand the science of human milk, the importance of the exclusivity of human milk, and the duration of human milk. I also think then my work in terms of the 10-step model for human milk and breastfeeding in sick infants and vulnerable infants, I think that we have very strong data, both from the US and now internationally, that shows that if we follow this sequential step-by-step process, we can actually have babies go home on human milk and be breastfed, even if they're born critically ill.
And in terms of the international information that you've gathered, so the 10 steps are very practical. You've implemented these in other countries, in other resource settings. Are they applicable if you are, for example, in a very low resource setting environment?
So the 10 steps I do think can be applied in high resource and low resource settings with modification. So for example, in Thailand, which is a lower resource country, where they are not able to put breast pumps, for example, at every bedside, what they have done is they've created pumping stations. So in the hospital, they set up a room and they put 10 breast pumps, hospital grade, around a table, and the women come to this pumping station and they express milk together communally as a group. So, that's an adaptation, right? But it's increasing mothers' access to a high quality pump so she can achieve higher milk volume and sustain milk production. Another example would be thinking about milk transport and storage. Thailand, for example, is a very hot country, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it's very warm. And so you have to think about education that would be needed in terms of transporting milk. In that country, you really wouldn't want milk being transported in a frozen state because by the time it would arrive where you need it to be, it would be thawed, right? So I think that high resource, low resource, what we see, because again, these are steps that are really taking the mother through the process of providing the baby milk, getting through discharge and direct breastfeeding at the breast, if that's the mom's goal. And they're really based on what we know about all the available evidence about the science of human milk.
And just before we finish with the last question, I wonder if there's an emotional story, one that really sticks in your mind of perhaps one of these really incredibly critically ill infants where you've had this amazing, exclusive human milk diet. Is there some instance that comes to your mind you just want to share?
I could share hundreds of stories. One in particular is a baby who was born with a very complex surgical diagnosis called Bacterial syndrome. So he had an abnormal GI system, he had abnormal bone structure, but he was also perinatal birth asphyxia. And his APGARs were 0, 0, and 5. And he had been a product of infertility. His parents had used reproductive technology to get pregnant, so it was a very valued pregnancy. We told the parents that he was not going to survive. We treated him as a palliative care case. The parents did want everything done for him because of being a very valued pregnancy. The parents sat by his bedside. Mom pumped every 2 to 3 hours around the clock. Mom and dad both did oral care. 2 weeks, the time came when we were going to withdraw him from life support. The father actually presented me with a DVD that had 2 weeks of oral care video, and he said, thank you. He said, thank you for this opportunity that we actually got to know our child and bond with our child. And I still cry when I talk about this family. We extubated the baby. We had done all the memory stuff. We set mom up to be a donor to the milk bank. We extubated him, and he didn't die. And he's actually now 4 years old. And he received human milk via a feeding tube for over 1 full year of his life. And he is doing things that they said were never, ever feasible for him. They said that he would be a complete vegetative state. And he is a special needs child, but he's learning how to walk, and he's very joyful. And it's, it's amazing. And you ask the parents, and they're like, if he had not had all the oral care and all that human milk, he wouldn't be with us today.
Fantastic example of the power of human milk.
Absolutely.
And so one last question or piece of advice. What would you say to listeners out there who are perhaps faced with barriers, challenges in the institution or in the community of trying to achieve some of the things that you are discussing today?
So I guess I would say 2 things. One is making sure when you make change that you're doing it based on science, not based on ideology, not based on breastfeeding's warm and fuzzy, but based on actual science, and make sure you're doing data-driven change. And then I also would say the second thing is when you're working with clinicians and with families, you have to meet them where they're coming from. Everyone has a different story, and we have to help understand that story, whether it's a clinician who's uninformed about human milk and they really just need education to be able to support families, or if it's a family who doesn't know anything about breastfeeding and never planned to do it. We have to meet them where they're coming from so that we can help more women make the decision to want to provide milk for their babies and to help them reach personal breastfeeding goals.